The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome and good afternoon and good morning, folks. Thank you for joining the Cyber Risk Aware webinar, Cast with Confidence, a phishing simulation masterclass. We're going to spend about 45 to 50 minutes on the presentation today. My name is John Leach and I'm your moderator for today's session, and I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Burke, the CEO and founder of Cyber Risk Aware, and Julie Marie Lehane, who's our specialist, is going to be presenting most of the material today. Just to let you know, we will be recording the webinar today so that you can review it at your leisure, and therefore you don't need to take copious notes as we go through, and we will be sending you out links to that as we go. During the session, if you have any questions that you want to ask, because we have quite a lot of material that we want to go through, so we would like to collect all the questions towards the end, and we will have 10 minutes or so at the end of the session to answer your questions. And if there's any further follow-up that we need in terms of questions that we haven't been able to get to in that time, because we do plan to finish on time, and we will get back to you at a later stage, and we'll make sure that all of your questions are answered as we go through the course of the presentation. Without any further ado, let me hand over to Stephen Burke, Stephen, to kick off the presentation and set the scene for us. So Stephen, over to you today.
Thanks very much, John. I'd like to say thank you to everybody who's taken the time out of your busy day to join us, and we're very honored to have your time and obviously talk about casting with confidence when it comes to phishing emails. My background is I'm a former Chief Information Security Officer. I've led global IT security programs, and no matter what I did, I ultimately kept identifying issues caused by, unfortunately, staff members who needed help. So the whole goal of Cyber Risk Aware is to help companies assess human cyber risk in their organization. And we do that through simulated phishing, which is what we're going to talk about today, but we also do submission campaigns as well as cyber knowledge assessments, and all of which enabling you to assess human cyber risk and then trigger security awareness training content, both scheduled and in real time, which is our unique differentiator on the market, where you can deliver the right message to the right user at the right time. That is the holy grail of security awareness. But we won't talk about that today. We will talk about that in an upcoming webinar. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Julie.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, John. I have 12 years experience in IT, the last 7 of which have been dedicated to information security training and awareness. During that time, I have defined and managed both phishing and a variety of other ethical social engineering testing programs for many companies of varying size and industry, including multinational corporations like Mars, Exelon, and McDonald's. It is through the experience of working with our clients that Stephen and I actually began to outline this webinar and the specific points of interest that we hope will serve to deepen your understanding of current phishing trends and how those trends can be applied to your forthcoming phishing campaigns. Our agenda will lead us through a basic history on the evolution of phishing, onto the current phishing threat landscape, and then we'll review campaign best practices, including pre and post work. If you move on to the next slide, slide 4. Recently, a new client that I was supporting, a pharmaceutical company, came to me with a set of goals and expectations for their prospective phishing campaign. They were basing these goals and expectations on an audit that had been carried out for them about a year prior, in which they had received a phishing click rate of about 12%. However, when digging down into the audit findings, I discovered that, in fact, their click rate had been based on a campaign of a single lure targeting a sample group of less than 30 employees, when in reality it was a company of several thousand. The error here is not necessarily in conceptualization or with the auditors or with the company, but rather it points to a fundamental struggle within the information security industry. The cyber threat landscape is always evolving. There are always new trends in social engineering and phishing, and in order to effectively and efficiently train staff, we have to be sure that our lures go far enough, that they present a reality and prepare our audience for reality that is actually existing out in the world. Next slide. To have a strong defense against phishing, it is necessary to have a grounded perspective of its history and its evolution. Some of the first references to phishing occurred in 1996. It was a time of dial-up internet and AOL was king. I don't know if any of you remember this, but I certainly will always remember the sound of dial-up internet. The name phishing, especially the PH part of phishing, related to telecommunication phreaking. Those that engage in the practice would try to secure free access to the internet, which then evolved into posing as AOL employees, stealing credentials, and ultimately then into stealing credit cards. By the time the year 2000 rolled around, the world was ready to be introduced to a new layer of social engineering, namely emotional manipulation. In May of 2000, global inboxes were being filled with emails proclaiming that someone special had sent them a love letter. However, when the text file was open, it infected the local device, and what would become known as the worm, I love you, would then overwrite image files and overwrite contact lists. Before it overwrote the contact list, it would actually steal the address book and then send itself out, to the point where approximately 45 million devices across 20 countries had been impacted. So it was really then that phishing had made a name for itself, let's say, on the global stage. It was also then that phishing became much more commercialized. Opportunities for casual hackers and who would become known as script kiddies to purchase hacking tools, set up bots, and packs really rose and became more prominent. Suddenly, dozens of domains were being registered and spoofed legitimate sites like eBay and PayPal in order to steal financial or identity customer information. Through the 2010s, phishing continued to evolve to include short URLs in addition to hyperlinks and targeted spear phishing messages, or what really was the beginning of those spear phishing messages. Next slide. Data from the anti-phishing workgroup shows that the number of unique phishing attacks has continually risen and has steadily risen. Some years it's even doubled and tripled. The current phishing landscape is rife with the threat of ransomware, of malware, and of spear phishing, including the highly granular business email compromise, or known as the BEC attacks. These incidents are targeting not only large global companies, but we have seen, especially in this past 12 months, a lot of targeted attacks against smaller businesses, SMEs, as they are also known. Next slide. Therefore, we have to resolve to phish not like it's 1996, but rather for 2018, with a clear view of the threats that we are facing. Here on this slide is an example of a current threat. And by current, I mean current. This type of email phishing lure, replicating an official tax email, of course, we've just been through tax time, sort of on both sides of the pond, is not only precise in its imagery and language, but in its example of social engineering, or social engineers redoubling their efforts, combining their phishing attacks with smishing and vishing attacks. What does that mean? Well, in other words, this individual, who would be the recipient of the attack, would have received an email, an SMS text message, and a phone call trying to convince them of the legitimacy of this fraud. It is then our job to prepare these individuals, for these kinds of attacks, where really they have to face not just the basic, grammatical mistakes, not just the basic fuzzy graphics or calls of urgency, but have to be in the habit every single email of questioning the legitimacy, taking that extra step to ensure the security. Next slide. Understanding the level of complexity and means of real-world phishing is a first step toward more impactful campaigns. However, it is also necessary to understand what is at stake when the risk is not fully addressed. Next slide. There are acute dangers to training staff with oversimplified phishing lures. Firstly, inaccurate results will offer a false degree of security to leadership and the employee population. This can be incredibly frustrating if the leadership believes that a specific goal has been achieved and then doesn't have the understanding of the landscape or the kinds of threats that are faced or that are being evolved, to understand that number can fluctuate based on the degree of complexity, but also based on the frequency of the testing, etc. Future training may be in jeopardy, and unidentified gaps will continue without resolution if this kind of testing and progress isn't maintained. Furthermore, employees will be at risk from unlearned threats. So if a new threat comes onto the stage that your employees have never seen or heard of, and they won't be prepared for, and that will be a detriment to both you and your organization and the employee. The diverse functionality of your phishing platform will also be wasted. As Stephen mentioned earlier, we have a lot of different pieces of functionality that are in place, that are constantly being upgraded, that are constantly being evolved to continually help you and your needs. And we hope that these will be utilized. That's why we put them there. It's to help you with your efforts in education and awareness. Next slide. So then, why is phishing so successful? The prevalence of email use can make the threat of phishing seem almost inescapable. The volume of corporate and personal email traffic over multiple accounts can be, just dizzying. Even more so when you consider how important email has become as a means of verifying identity. Any accounts that you get locked out of, or a new account that you create, it's automatically tied back to one email or another. Very few individuals though fully understand and the importance of email, and then take the necessary steps and precautions to protect their email. So, for example, setting unique, strong, and complex passwords on their email, enabling layers of security protection like two-factor authentication, etc., are different ways that we could be protecting our email if we fully realized how important it was. Not necessarily taking place. Next slide. Ransomware is a type of malware that, once having infected a device, will exert control over that device, thereby restricting or completely impeding access to the device and its contents. Folders, files, pictures, music, software, and systems, everything on a device can be held hostage as the hackers attempt to ransom the access back to the user. It's no surprise then that this type of manipulation happens frequently in phishing. Most ransomware lands on a device by individuals who click on unknown or suspicious email hyperlinks. They'll click on the hyperlink will then proceed to download a malicious package, or it will take them to a site where the site will have that infection and download the material onto their device. But new trends in ransomware show that that emails are now coming over already as infected, with email attachments becoming more commonplace. And so it's no longer that it's only the hyperlink you have to be worried about. It's important to understand the role that attachments can have in the risk to ransomware. It's also important to note that ransomware has continued to evolve to spread more easily over networks and impact business-critical systems. So the threat to the individual device has changed, whereas that device, if it's connected to a network or in communication with a network, will have a higher risk to all of the devices on the network than just its own content. Next slide. Both Target and Anthem are marvelously infamous examples of companies that experienced data breaches tied back to phishing. Together, the impact of their data breaches affected 120 million consumers for life. I mean, if you really think about, especially the Anthem victims, their social security number, their government issued ID number, their, those pieces are never going to change, right? You don't get issued another one because you lost one. So that's something that they're going to have to think about constantly. Security isn't something that will be a luxury for them anymore. It will be a means of survival. They'll have to think about what actions they're taking to protect themselves and their data and their identity. In the case of Anthem, it was an email containing malicious software attachment that was opened by a recipient, and that we know of, it was just one recipient. So that's important to note as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be that a group of people or that a department of people, or even that a highly prized person that had an incredible amount of access. Really, it was just one person that opened this message that unknowingly allowed the hackers to gain remote access to the systems and data. Similarly, the Target data breach began when a third-party vendor allowed hackers into their systems through phishing. Trends show that a high percentage of data breaches can be directly linked back to successful phishing attacks. So we know that this is a clear vector of entry. Next slide. Therefore, armed with a deeper understanding of phishing trends, we can delve into what it's going to take to piece together an effective phishing campaign. Next slide. Generally, a campaign will begin with an analysis of current trends in phishing. However, each industry can be threatened by individuals with different motivations. Their motivations will impact their style and their resources. It's important to understand the who and the why as you plan out your how. The strategy of how usually follows a pattern to test your audience, train your audience, and then increase the sophistication level of the test when the data shows users are ready. One notable exception to this that should not be discounted involves the first campaign. This is a question that we often get in relation to how do you kick a campaign off if users are not used to this type of security testing, this type of security activity, or in fact, if no information security program exists at all. While I agree that there are some short-term benefits to this type of a campaign, for example, where to start a phishing testing and training, you know, and you decide you want to make a splash, rather than start with a low sophistication lure and work your way up, you decide that you want to kick off with a high sophistication lure and snare quite a large group of unexpected workers. This is a completely legitimate way of announcing yourself, of announcing your intention, of announcing your program. You know, you can certainly modify the user feedback message to say something along the lines of, you know, this is, you know, evidence of the kind of phishing that is out in the world, and we'd like to, you know, start an awareness training program. We encourage you to participate in our different sessions, et cetera, et cetera. And again, as I said, in the short term, I think that that's completely legitimate. It is something that I've helped people on, that absolutely, and there are certain management styles that really prefer that kind of kickoff. I think that's fine. But in the long run, laying a foundation and then building on it, I think is going to ultimately have a greater impact, and make sure that you're meeting each one of those little corners and gaps, that you're making sure that each crack is filled. If you start with a low sophistication and you slowly build on it to cover all of the evolving threats, and to cover any new, because we have new phishing messages that are published all the time, you know, that are covering whether it be by your industry or you know, whatever reasons that you have for making those selections. You ensure that you know, that your population is seeing all of the different techniques, and is really gaining on all of the learnings. And so I really think that in the long run, having that kind of you know, pattern makes the most sense, where you send out a campaign, you send out training, awareness, education, and then based on the results, you are able to advance them. Does that mean that you're able to advance them no matter what? Of course not. You want to make sure, and of course, depending on the size of your organization and the goals and results that you're looking for, you want to make sure that you meet that before you move on. And thankfully, we have a large quantity of phishing lures that are out there that you can utilize, and again, we're always publishing more. Next slide. Understanding the motive behind a threat actor can be just as important as understanding sort of what trends are out there. Some of the most common threat actors and motives include hacktivists or hacker activists. These individuals are threat actors that target organizations or workers to promote a specific social cause. So for example, it might be something like animal rights, it might be something like civil rights in their region or location, but many may have a even more specific, it might be a very specific organization that they're fighting for. They may target organizations simply to draw attention to their cause, or they may target organizations that they feel violate their ideals. So if it is an animal rights group, for example, they may target a fur trader as an example of a hacktivist attack, or they may just target any group that speaks to their audience, or that has a low level of security that they can exploit. The cyber terrorist group is similar to hacktivists, but these are terrorists that have a political motivation rather than a social cause. They may wish to disrupt political processes like elections, or expose politicians or political parties. So often that might include publishing content as well as hacking. Organized crime is usually made up of individuals that work together for a monetary profit. They may be running a scheme to defraud organizations or individuals of money. They may be planning ATM skimming devices. They may be recording account numbers or trying to get that confidential credential data that they can use on other accounts, and gain information of PINs and unauthorized access, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of groups that run ransomware or the business email compromise attacks or schemes are related to organized crime. There's also state-sponsored hackers. These would be individuals that are funded by a government or a nation state. They may have the intent to harm another government or spy for their own government. However, they may also be carrying out a theft of intellectual property. I think that that's probably the most common area that we've seen in the past couple of years when it comes to state-sponsored threats, is this real hunger for intellectual property, especially around technology. So examples of this could include the Chinese army hacking into Google to steal intellectual property and access email accounts of Chinese activists, or it could include the multiple countries that allegedly work together to create the Stuxnet virus once upon a time to infiltrate and infringe the development of uranium in Iran, you know, as examples of state-sponsored kinds of threats. The classic hacker is most commonly the lone wolf hacker. They are the script kiddies that we've talked about. They have some notoriety because they're usually in it for personal gain or to create chaos, but they can be in it really for just the thrill of breaking the code, of showing the vulnerability of a system. So it's important to know, you know, who they're targeting as well, in order to have the appropriate defenses in place. Another group that can be classified as a threat actor, but I don't have up on the screen, would be the accidental internal user. Most of these individuals will have acted without malice, in ignorance. So these would be individuals that are making a mistake, that are making bad choices, that have bad habits, that we're actually working through our training to correct. These would be cases of human error, or you know, they can make up one of the biggest threats in an organization. And it's because of this that really we're here to help you create awareness and training opportunities so that we can change their habits from making poor choices, from making uninformed choices, to making more secure, confident choices. Internal users and organized criminals can make up some of the most commonly experienced phishing attacks, but it's important that you know that all of the actors and their motives can be relevant to almost any organization. I regularly witness phishing incidents that can be attributed to more varied attackers. and it's important for every organization to really understand their own industry so that they're able to prepare appropriately. So for example, a utility or an energy company maybe have a special target from a nation state cyber warfare, not only because energy and utility companies are critical infrastructure to a foreign nation state, but also because of that intellectual property technology piece. So again, it's important that in order to protect yourself appropriately, you have that that knowledge in place. Next slide. So once you're armed with these once you're armed with the knowledge of sort of who the threat actors could be and what their motivations are, you can then move on to selecting based on the complexity and the subject matter what lures you'd like to use. And so this is just a screenshot from our cyber risk aware system that shows you some of the lures that you have in place. I wanted to have this slide up here in case some of you maybe have not noticed in the past, the column for complexity. So you see here, there are high complexities that are listed as red. We have green as low, and then a yellow amber for the medium. But they're important, so as you're making the selections, to remember that they can be tweaked. So if there is something that you feel is really relevant to you that you'd like to maybe make more or less complex, you can certainly go in and edit any one of those individual lures, individual email templates to meet whatever needs you're looking for your organization or for your audience. So that might even be as simple as saying, okay, I think that a simple message that is related to a corporate software alert, should look like A, and then I'm going to add the company logo onto the medium sophistication, and then I'm going to add a signature onto the high sophistication, and I'm going to test the same group in different levels of, or the same department in different levels at different times once they've had that opportunity to experience and the learnings that we've given them and the additional training. So, again, any one of those subjects can be edited for those purposes. I'm going to move on to the next slide. And we're going to just quickly look at a couple of lure examples that I felt might be especially relevant for you to get an idea of what we're talking about. So this first one is a lure that we have in our system that is meant to replicate, unfortunately, some of the attacks that were going on this year related to current events. So of course, a current event happens. Sometimes a current event doesn't even need to happen. There was this, famous Putin breaking news story, phishing lure that happened, quite a few years ago, where it said breaking news, Putin's, has passed away, and individuals clicked on it without doing a little bit more research. So there are definitely current events that happen and that even don't need to happen. But this idea that something has happened in the news, something is out there in sort of the public consciousness, and social engineers will be capitalizing on that. And so in this lure, where we tested susceptibility to charity campaigns, is actually based on a real scam. The name of the organization that we have listed here is based on the actual organization that was being used to engineer the actual phishing attack. But the idea is the same. The idea is to get individuals to critically consider before they engage with any email. Is this a legitimate organization? And do I trust the email enough to click on the link? Do I, if I want to make a donation, is this the best way for me to do it? Or do I want to go to an organization that I know is legitimate, that I can go to directly, etc.? I'm going to go on to the next slide. And here's another example from the Cyber Risk Aware platform that is an example of an attachment lure that I wanted to show you that specifically has to do with a police penalty. So if I'm not mistaken, this is, I don't remember if it's a driving penalty or a parking penalty. Oh, it's a parking penalty, because we have more than one police penalty out there. But this specific one I wanted to show you because I really love how it says, if you see the piece that's in the color band, view attached photographic evidence of violation. So you receive the alert, you say, I don't think that was me. I didn't, I didn't have any violation. I haven't been notified of anything. But then there's that little temptation. Well, it says they have a picture of me breaking this law. Let me click on it. And again, as we saw with ransomware, as we saw with the business email compromise, as we saw with so many other pieces, attachments are being used more and more as a vector for phishing, for installing malicious software, etc. So it's important that our end users are appropriately aware of that and trained on that. Just because it says that that there's an attachment and it's come through and the email system hasn't blocked it, it actually doesn't mean that it's safe. I'm moving on to the next slide, and we have here another example of a lure. And this one I have, you'll notice there are pieces that I've blocked out, and the reason for that is that this is based on a managed service that we've done. So it's an actual internal threat that we've worked on based on the organization. So this one was based on an organization that was a family-owned company and had a very sort of familial kind of environment for their staff. And this type of lure, in this case, you'll see it says, I'm so-and-so, I know so-and-so, an important executive, they want you to give me a job, here's my email, it's attached. And in this case, actually, it's not even attached, it was a link to, it was a link outside. It looks like an attachment, but it was a link outside to a Google form or a file transfer form for you to be able to download it. So when we sent this out, we had so much success with it that unfortunately, the first go around, people were actually reaching out to the executive after getting the landing page, after getting the learning, and saying this was a phishing scam, and saying, I really want to hire this person that you recommended. Can you just send me the resume via email, and I'll look for a job for them. So again, that was because of the type of environments that we were looking at. That could be something that's relevant to you, I'm not sure. But actually, this phishing scam was based on an actual trend of scams that had to do with, similarly, with attachments. It had to do with a resume attachment. There was some that are as simple, and you would think that they would be lower sophistication because there's no bells and whistles, there's no fancy HTML, there's no beautiful graphic, so it looks like it should be lower sophistication, but in actuality, those other pieces, the fact that they're attachments, the fact that they're enticing you through other means, hey, did you see this picture from the company, Christmas party, etc., that entice you to open the attachment, and then that results in susceptibility to these kinds of malicious software attacks. I'm going to keep going if you want to move on to the next slide. You'll see here on this slide, we're back to a slide that I showed you earlier in terms of seeing the complexity. I just wanted to draw your attention again, now that we're looking at the same image, to notice not only the different subjects, but the different types of lures that we have out there. So you'll see the different variety in the email templates extends from not just attachments, which I was just talking about, but also business and home and personal. I really feel that, and I try to convey to all of our managed clients, that it's really important to look after the individuals and their habits during this home and personal space. It impacts your organization if it impacts the individual. You might say, okay, it doesn't matter to me if they're on social media, for example, but we actually know that in terms of trends, social media is one of the things that individuals are most susceptible to. And you might say, well, I block that out of all of our corporate devices. Okay, but are they checking their personal email on your device? If they're checking their personal email on your device and they don't have any safeguards on their email, and they don't take the same precautions that they do at work in their personal life, and they don't understand the reasons why they should be doing that, then it still ends up putting you and your systems and your data at risk. So it's really important that our solutions are comprehensive to the individual and to the threat landscape as a whole, in order to really fulfill the need of being effective and accurate. Next slide. Okay. Another thing that I wanted to draw your attention to was simply, as we move on into setting up the campaigns themselves, that there are different ways of sending out the lures. So you have you can just set one up and have control over it and say, I want these all to go out right now. And that's certainly a way to do it. But depending on how large your organization is, how much you want to overwhelm the email system, how many lures you're using at any one time, it might be worthwhile for you to explore the batch mode and the burst mode. The batch mode will give you the opportunity to send out one lure over an extended period of time. And the burst mode will allow you to send out multiple lures to individuals for them to be published within a given time that you've selected. Next slide. It's also important for you to capitalize on the opportunity that we have set up in terms of reactive trainings. Reactive trainings are excellent on so many levels. First of all, they really help you cut out a lot of the extra work that you do in terms of pulling down your results and then analyzing them and then setting up campaigns to retest people. All of that is certainly important, and you know, certainly you can go around doing it like that, and there are reasons to do that. But as you go along and you're, you know, in another round of testing, you might find it beneficial to set up something like a reactive training. And basically what a reactive training does is it gives you the opportunity to say, if a user takes X, Y, or Z action, I want them to receive immediate training. And so in this case, you can see we've selected, okay, if they click on the URL, they should be enrolled into, you know, training X. And then they'll then receive an email that says, we see that you've taken an action, and then and so we've asked you to please complete this, whether it's a short video or, you know, whatever kind of training you've selected. This can be especially useful if it's a group of individuals you've already given, because certainly we don't want to single anyone out or punish them for what is in effect a learning exercise. But once it's happened repeatedly, You know, they might be in your repeat offender list, for example, and you've already given them the opportunity, they've already received training, and you want to make sure that they realize that you are monitoring them, that you are, in fact, reviewing their learnings, and so then to be able to enroll them is just an added efficiency. Next slide. I also want to draw your attention to customized learnings. So that's one thing that, as a managed program, I always try to do with regards to lures. I want individuals to receive, just like in reactive trainings, they receive an automatic consequence, let's say, of their action. Through customized learnings, they sort of get that automatic mirror up and say, what did I just click on, and what should I have seen? And so in this case, one of the ways that we do that is by highlighting through flags what they should have seen, what tells were in the email that they just engaged with. And of course, depending on the sophistication of the lure, there might be more or less flags. That's absolutely fine. But it really gives you the opportunity to go in, customize your own user feedback message to have exactly the language that you're interested in having for your organization. In terms of campaign setup, an additional consideration, I just want to mention quickly the opportunity to have to work with the help desk. They're there. Obviously, your corporate help desk is there to work with you. You can do that many different ways. You can set up a pilot with them to one, test the help desk, as well as test the incident response. So once if they don't click on something and they realize something's amiss, what action are they taking? But also to prepare them before it goes out to the entire population of your organization on what they should be doing and how they should be directing those individuals. I wanted to make sure you saw the reporting button, fish hook, which we have in the left-hand navigation. That's something that if you have additional questions for, you can certainly contact us, but it is an opportunity for you to customize a button, a response button that can be added to Outlook email, and directed, that reporting button can be directed to any email within your organization. So whether it's to your help desk or whether it's to your security or whatever your processes are, it can be customized to that, and that will give individuals an opportunity to respond in a positive fashion. So later on, I'll mention very quickly gamification. That's an excellent way of having gamification. Instead of having a training where you know, is a response to a reactive training, you have the opportunity to reward an individual or a group of individuals who actually took the correct step of reporting a lure. And finally, the multiple languages and the customized user feedback messages are just additional opportunities to really make sure that your strategy follows all the way through, that you've mentioned the trainings, the learnings. You can link back to your own you know, corporate internal sites if you have additional material or knowledge base or articles that you want individuals to review. Those are really there for you to get them to do whatever you need them to do to maximize you know, the opportunity for you to be in communication with your end user. Next slide. I'm going to go through the next slides relatively quickly. This is just some pieces that I wanted you to see in relation to what to do after a campaign. So you'll see the first piece that I have here is some of the reporting. If any of you haven't had the chance to look at your reporting, this is a relatively new area that we've upgraded. I should say not new, we have reporting, but that we've upgraded upgraded and is really excellent, has a lot of different information out there. I'm going to show you a couple of pieces out there, but I really do encourage you to go onto your own platforms, or if you don't have a platform yet and are looking for a demo, that you let us know, and we can certainly show this to you in more granular detail. But you'll see that we have lots of different reporting. This is actually just for phishing. We have other areas that are out there, which we'll get to in subsequent webinars. The first report that I wanted to draw your attention to that is relevant for creating campaigns, and part of that pre and post work I had mentioned earlier, is really looking at your benchmark. So we, within this company phishing report, we have it down here in the lower piece. I'm sorry, I'm now on slide 27. And part of the benchmark, in the lower part of that graph, you'll see a benchmark for your industry, as well as which is an industry published number, and then an internal cyber risk aware number, as well as your own company's statistics. So you'll be able to compare those and understand sort of where you're falling in the field. Are you doing much better? Are you doing much worse? Is it something that you really need to focus on and have, smart goals to get within a specific range that you're looking for? And of course, we can help you with all of that once you have made that determination. But it's a great way of really understanding, and especially as you're reporting back to management, to be able to show not just how you're doing, but what that number really translates to in the long run. And moving on to the template effectiveness slide, it's just another quick way of being able to gauge the effectiveness of individual templates before you select them, but also once you've utilized them, how you're doing comparatively to other organizations within the cyber risk aware network in terms of results. So a great way to measure and to select for future campaigns. The next slide is the timely report. That has a breakdown on the different days and times that your past lures were most effective. So there might be some pieces of learning there if, for example, Fridays where everyone has a half day, or Mondays where people are coming in tired, you have huge spikes, or weekends, for example, that you might have a specific piece of training that you would like to speak to your end users about. And it might help you not just speak to and train them, but then further test them in subsequent campaigns. On the next slide, we have the geolocation and system report, another great way. I used this report very recently in terms of determining that an organization had a travel safety concern. Individuals were going out over spring break, and I could see them all over the Caribbean and in different places all around the world, clicking up a storm. And so it's really taking the opportunity to say, even if you're outside the office, first of all, are you on VPN? But second of all, you have to be cognizant of, it doesn't matter if you're on an iPad, it doesn't matter if you're on a phone, it doesn't matter if you don't see the full email address without a couple of additional clicks. You have to take these pieces of security seriously. There's some other pieces within this report that you can't see on this slide that you'll have to go into our platform to explore further. But the system piece, it will tell you what operating system they're on, what device they're on, and those pieces are really relevant of what browser they're on. They're really relevant because they, if you have, let's say the entire organization is supposed to be on IE7, you have the opportunity to see, is everyone using the correct software, the correct operating system? Has it been upgraded accordingly? What additional vulnerabilities are out there, etc. I'm going to move on to the next slide, and this is just a dashboard communication. This isn't a report that we have out there. I just wanted to include this in as something that we've done for our managed service clients. And it's just an example of how you should keep communications open with the end users. I realize that the reporting functions are mostly going to be for your leadership and your security staff, as well as for, maybe your auditors or whoever you're keeping evidence for, compliance, et cetera. And that's excellent. Definitely that's why we put them there for. But I think that there is value in communicating back to the end user in regards to what the results of a test are, what their goals should be, and where the risks are. So if you're challenging them, you'll see here in the last one in regards to some of the danger departments, HR, legal, are these areas where individuals have added access to sensitive company data? If it is, what can we do to, again, make sure that we're meeting that need, that we're closing that gap? Next slide. We're on to the proactive incident response. This is just, next slide, an opportunity to remind you what more you can do beyond just launching from the platform. Once you've launched from the platform, it's a place to get started. Again, we have different areas of training, of quizzes, etc., on the platform that of course are very relevant to the overall safety of an organization and what we want, and in terms of developing a security culture, which I'll touch on in a moment. But there are pieces of learnings that you can take from your testing that will then play out in terms of relevance. For example, out of office messaging. You can cover with your end users the difference between internal messaging and external messaging. Travel safety, I already mentioned. Are they clicking all over the world? Do you need them to rein that in? Whaling, targeted spear phishing, specifically the business email compromise attacks. Are there pieces, there are groups that have financial access that you need to target on, and you can define the learnings of the landing pages to those needs. And similarly, in terms of an incident response reporting, you want to make sure that the groups of individuals that you're talking to, that they understand that had that not been a test, real world consequences could have happened, not from you, right? This isn't a parent-child kind of situation, but from the actual social engineers out there against the real company's reputation, costing the company real money, and impacting the lives of many people. And so what does that responsibility translate to? Who is going to be on board in terms of helping protect the organization? Next slide.
Yeah, Julie, we're obviously just getting very close to the time. I don't want to leave a minute or two. We have just one or two questions maybe to address, so get to that reasonably quickly. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is we're on to the last slides, literally. So this is the refining your security culture slide. I'll just, I'm on slide 35 now. So this is literally the last slide I have out there in terms of just taking the learnings that we have talked about and creating a mature security culture. So you want to keep the transparency and communication open. You want to have leadership support that is going to show the importance of security and the importance of the results that you're creating and the learning opportunities that you're creating back to the organization. Gamification, again, we already talked about in terms of rewarding positive behavior, encouraging the building of good habits inside and outside of the office. And ultimately, especially with our larger organizations or our organizations that are spread out over different locations, the opportunity of creating a security champion network, expanding security outside of just the team into other departments, into other individuals that have expressed interest and that can help be your eyes and ears throughout the organization.
Okay. Thank you, Julie, for that. I mean, for all of that content over the past while. I'm just conscious of time, folks. We did say we'd finish the top of the hour, so we're just a minute or two beyond that. I do have one question, Julie or Stephen, if you wanted to take it. There was a question from a participant who asked that basically when they ran phishing campaigns, they seemed to only plateau at getting 15 to 20% failure rates. They didn't seem to be able to get below that. And they were wondering, was that good? Because our chart had lower rates at one point. Or what should they do to try and get below a sort of a 15% failure rate on their phishing campaigns if that's where they're stuck?
It's a great question. Happy to start, and I'm sure Julie will have some comments on it. I think a lot of companies do start to see plateaus around the 15% mark. I think it's definitely a percentage I have heard. I chaired a round table recently at an event in London, and this came up, and people were started to focus in on specific countries, probably being more susceptible than others. One was Eastern European, and it was interesting to see why that was, but I probably won't name it today. But one person at that roundtable actually then suggested that the wrong people were involved, as in they brought in a marketing person who could specialize in how to get the message out there correctly among staff to help reinforce technical messaging with more personal, relative commentary to users that really resonated with them. So when you look at technologists, they're not the best educators in the world, and they're good at understanding risks and trying to help people and defend the network, but when it comes to educating, not so. So by bringing other people in that have education background or messaging backgrounds, that it actually brought down the percentage to 5%. And I thought that was very interesting.
That's really good. Thanks, Stephen. There's one other question from a participant who was picking up on the comment Julia made about out-of-office messaging, and in terms of what advice would you give, for out-of-office messaging, both internal and external? What are the things that people need to look out for?
Oh, that's a great question, and I love that question. The out-of-office messaging in some of the more risque behavior that can be witnessed in terms of external messaging. You can have individuals that are basically giving out, I mean, they treat it like it's social media. I'm in Aruba this week. I'll be back on Friday at 2 p.m. on this flight. If you need me in regards to Project A, contact this person. Here's their cell phone number. And by the end of the email, you think that they're sharing the entire reporting structure of the organization. There's a lot of risk to that, and a lot of risk to not just that individual, but then to all of the individuals that they've named. That can go on and trickle down to be used as a means of social engineering. In fact, we have seen evidence of that in regards specifically to the BECs, to the business email compromise attacks, where they're actually taking sort of the opportunity to message you and say, hey, I saw John is in Aruba this week, must be fun on the beach, and then build this rapport with you, build this sort of longevity of a relationship with you, and then use that to extract confidence and a relationship, and then build on that to whatever they want to. And most often is the case with those, it's financial. I've definitely seen companies send out millions of dollars based on this kind of attack. So in those cases, I would really encourage individuals to either choose not to send out external messages, so that any messaging that they do want to share is only done internally. And then if they do have an external message, it's very simple, one line. I'm currently out of the office. Thank you for your email. I will get back to you when I have the opportunity. It doesn't need to say when. It doesn't need to say how. It doesn't need to say anything else. And then most people are checking their email as they're out, just to really be cognizant of that travel safety piece of that you're taking the same precautions on the road and on your mobile devices that you would be taking on your computer screen.
Okay, really good advice there, Julie. Thank you. So keep those messages simple, particularly for the external users or external audience, I think is the key advice. Okay, folks, we're just beyond our 3 o'clock stop. I would like to take the opportunity to thank you all for joining the webinar, and thank you for your questions, which helps us make sure that we drive value out for everybody attending. As I said earlier at the start, we have recorded this webinar, and we will post and send out a link to everybody that attended so you can review the content at a later stage. So with that, it just remains me to thank Julie and thank Stephen for their contribution and presentation today. Hope you found it of value, and do look out for communications about the next webinars in our series, as we do have a number planned over the summer on a variety of topics. So with that, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.